Odysseus was destined to be the king of Ithaca. When this story begins, he already has a beautiful wife and a young son, and was the mastermind behind the Trojan horse which helped the Greeks win the war at Troy. After that victory, he attempted to return home, but kept getting waylaid by the craziest series of events imaginable. I'm about to explain 10 years in a couple minutes. If you like the quality and content, please sub and share Uncomfortable Game Shorts, so it'll be easier to find me in the future. Odysseus' 10-year journey starts when some of the gods who were angry with the Greeks for their ransacking of Troy created a massive storm and threw Odysseus' flotilla of ships off course, landing them near Sicily. He and his crew went ashore to look around and happened across a cave with food and supplies. Suddenly, a giant shepherd cyclops named Polyphemus arrived and rolled a gigantic rock over the doorway. As it turns out, the cave was his home. Odysseus expected hospitality from the cyclops since he was a stranger in need, but instead, Polyphemus ate a couple sailors and went to sleep. The next morning, Polyphemus ate a few more crewmates and went out with his flock for the day. While away, ever-clever Odysseus drew up a plan and got ready for the Cyclops' return. Later that evening, Odysseus enticed Polyphemus to drink some strong wine, causing him to get wickedly drunk. Now in a good mood, he asks Odysseus what his name was, and Odysseus replied by calling himself Nobody. For feeding and entertaining the Cyclops, Polyphemus promised to eat nobody last. Then he fell over and passed out. The crew seized their opportunity and took a sharpened stake that they were hiding in a pile of poop and heated it by the fire. They then drove that makeshift spear into the Cyclops' one eye, enraging and blinding him. Neighboring Cyclops came running to the boulder blocking the cave entrance and asked Polyphemus why he was yelling. Polyphemus replied, "Nobody is hurting me!" So they left him alone. After a while, Polyphemus adapted to his loss of sight by feeling the tops of each sheep as he shepherded them out of the cave, while saving Odysseus and his crew for snacks each time he came home. But again, the great tactician came up with another plan. He and his crew tied themselves tightly to the underside of the sheep as they were being issued out of the cave, and it worked! Now outside, Odysseus and his men raced for their ships, and in a moment of hubris, Odysseus shouted back at Polyphemus from the water, taunting him. Furious, the Cyclops hurled large boulders in the direction of the voice, causing huge waves that almost wrecked the ships. Then the Cyclops prayed to his father Poseidon to bring grief and trouble to Odysseus. As the crew sailed on, they met with Aeolus, the keeper of the winds. He gave Odysseus a bag of winds and left a westerly wind that would help the crew sail home. They were so very close to Ithaca now when Odysseus, overcome with fatigue, fell asleep. His crew noticed the bag, which contained the winds, and, thinking the bag actually contained gold, opened it, unleashing a great tempest, which blew the ship right back to Aeolus, who refused to help them for a second time. They set off the best they could and ended up at the land of the Laestrygonian giants. Odysseus kept his boat away from the coast, but sent other ships to scout ahead. They were immediately attacked by boulders and harpoons, and only Odysseus' ship escaped. After sailing for some time, they found Aea, where part of the crew explored without Odysseus and found some strangely well-mannered animals that led them to Circe, a powerful witch. She convinced them to stay with her, and most of the crew agreed, except for Eurylochus, who was rather suspicious of the whole thing and hid, watching. Good thing too, he saw Circe drug the crew and turn them into pigs. Eurylochus ran back to tell his captain what he saw, and Odysseus grabbed his sword and approached Circe's palace. Circe quickly realized she was outmatched and agreed to change the crew back to human form. However, she wasn't done. She used her looks and cunning to entice Odysseus to stay longer on the island as her partner, and thus the crew remained on that island for a whole year. After all that time, Odysseus became homesick and longed to return to Ithaca where his wife, son, and throne were. Circe realized she couldn't keep him any longer and told him to seek out the famous prophet Tiresias by sailing to the edge of the world and making a sacrifice there to summon him from the underworld, since he was already dead. In so doing, Tiresias told him that at some point he would land on the island of Thrinacia, where Helios, the sun god, kept cattle and were not to be eaten under any circumstances. During this prophecy, many spirits and ghosts were wandering around, including some fallen comrades like Achilles, who was upset about being dead, as well as Odysseus' mother, who, upon noticing him, revealed that she had died of grief for her son who had never returned home. He also found the spirit of Agamemnon, who, after being killed by his own wife upon returning from Troy, told Odysseus to trust no women. Once the prophecies were complete, the sailors returned to Aea, where Circe explained the perils they would face on their way home. First, they had to pass the sirens, whose music was so lovely that it would lure men to their deaths. Following Circe's instructions, the crew crew filled their ears with beeswax, but not Odysseus, perhaps because he wanted to hear the song and tell the tale, so he had the crew tie him to the ship instead. Well, the siren songs were overwhelming, and Odysseus frantically gestured that he wanted to be untied, but his crew knew what was going on and simply tightened the knots instead. Next, the sailors had to pass between Scylla, a monster with 6 heads on long necks that would perch at the edge of a cliff and snatch sailors unlucky enough to get close to her, and Charybdis, a sea monster that sucked in large amounts of water, creating a whirlpool capable of swallowing ships whole. Odysseus had to sail the narrow space between the two, basically between a rock and a hard place, but unfortunately got too close to Scylla, who used each of her 6 heads to snatch some of his best sailors. The men screamed for help, but powerless, Odysseus could do nothing to save them and sailed on. Finally, the remaining sailors came to the island of Thrinacia, where they were reminded of the prophecy which told them not to eat any of the cattle. Odysseus thought they should just move on, but the crew begged to stay a while and rest. While they talked, the wind changed, and the crew could no longer sail off the island, stranding them there for an entire month. With food and supplies running low, and when Odysseus was asleep, some of the crew killed and ate a few cattle. When he woke up, he was furious at what they had done, and Helios was upset too, complaining to Zeus. He created a mighty storm which destroyed the ship and crew, but luckily Odysseus survived by cobbling together some wood from the shipwreck to make a raft. Upon leaving on his small raft, Odysseus had to again pass between Scylla and Charybdis and landed on the island of Ogygia, home of the beautiful sea nymph called Calypso, meaning the concealer. She fell in love with Odysseus and seduced him into staying with her for 7 years until, as before, he eventually became depressed and would sit at the edge of the island looking towards Ithaca. The gods on Olympus saw Odysseus being all sad and felt sorry for him, except for Poseidon, who was still angry that he blinded his son Polyphemus. So Athena waited until Poseidon took a business trip to receive a sacrifice from some followers far away and persuaded Zeus to help Odysseus. He agreed and sent the messenger god Hermes to the island to tell Calypso that her honeypot game had to stop. She wasn't happy, but knew better than to disobey the gods. She helped Odysseus build a ship, gave him provisions for the journey, and sent him on his way home. Again. Along that trip, Odysseus was unlucky enough to run into Poseidon, who was returning from his business trip. He got so angry at seeing Odysseus sailing home that he took his trident and stirred up a huge storm that smashed Odysseus' ship on some rocks and would have killed him if a sea nymph hadn't taken pity on him and brought him to shore. She dragged him over land, which scraped his body and tore off his clothes. Then she left him in some shrubs where he fell asleep. He was awoken by the sound of young ladies and decided to cover his nude body with branches to approach them. And get this, the group of girls happened to be Princess Nausicaa playing ball with her servants. When they saw Odysseus naked and dirty, they fled in terror, but not the princess. Athena helped her stand strong, and she remained there, whereupon Odysseus threw himself at her feet and asked for pity. She gave him food and clothes and fell in love with him. Damn, for all this guy's hardships like losing his people and missing his home, he sure was lucky with the ladies. The princess invited him to the palace, but she had a wild plan. Odysseus couldn't just walk into the city with the princess. That would be strange. It'd start gossip. Instead, she went alone and told Odysseus to simply walk into the palace after her, go straight to her mother, the queen, and fall before her as if at her service. This part's nuts. The king and queen were so impressed by Odysseus' regal manner and bearing. Remember, he was raised to be the king of Ithaca after all. That, in line with some insanely helpful local customs, the king offered him a ship to sail home in. But before departing, the king threw a feast with games and entertainment. At the party, the blind bard Domodocus sang songs of the battle at Troy, the same battle that Odysseus had won and was trying to return home from. Upon hearing the tales of death and destruction, Odysseus began to weep. The king noticed this and asked the stranger who he really was. Odysseus told them everything, from the war to the storms, the cyclops, the witches, the prophecies, everything. In the end, Odysseus said that although he is being heralded as some hero, in reality, he's a wretched man who just wanted to return home to his family. The next morning, Odysseus was finally able to leave for another attempt home, and being exhausted, he slept the entire way. When the ship arrived at Ithaca, the crew that sailed him there didn't want to disturb him, so they left him, still sleeping on the beach. When he awoke, Athena appeared to him and told him that not all is well. She disguised him as a beggar and sent him to seek out his most loyal servant, Eumaeus, which he did, and convinced his old friend that he was just a poor refugee from Crete. While talking in Eumaeus' house, Odysseus learned that there's over 100 suitors at the palace trying to marry Queen Penelope. Just then, Odysseus' son, Telemachus, returned from his trip to Sparta, and Odysseus was heartened to see how warmly Eumaeus received him, like a son, and then leaves to tell Penelope about the boy's return. With Odysseus and Telemachus alone, Athena appears, removes Odysseus' disguise, and commands that he reveal himself to his son, who had been fighting all this time to find news of his father. At first, Telemachus didn't believe that his father had returned. He thought it was a trick, but was eventually overcome with tears, and the two embraced. Odysseus then shares a clever plan with his son to remove the suitors and take back his throne. Before Eumaeus returns, he puts his beggar costume back on and asks if he may beg for money at the palace, which was relatively common in some places. This gave Odysseus valuable scouting information, and he found that all the suitors were actually weak cowards, and that their ringleader, Antinous, was an especially evil man. Antinous even smashed a stool on Odysseus' back because he looked like a beggar, but he kept up the ruse and never revealed himself. Then, Penelope, who was unaware that her husband hid before her, made an announcement that she had finally, after 10 years, decided that Odysseus must be dead, and that she would be ready to pick a suitor the next day. All the men partied and boasted at this news, and eventually went to bed eager for tomorrow. That's when Odysseus and his son put their plan into action. First, they went and hid all the suitors' weapons and armor. But at some point, Penelope comes and wishes to speak to the beggar. She thinks he might have news of her husband. She goes on to explain that she'd been able to delay getting remarried only because she kept undoing all the weaving on a funeral shroud she was making for Odysseus' father, who had passed away. All the greedy suitors had promised to wait for the shroud to be complete, but after 3 years of this ruse, she could slow it down no further. Just then, a palace nurse arrived and offered to wash Odysseus, who was still pretending to be a beggar. He tried to hide himself in the shadows as he undressed, but Penelope noticed a scar on his knee, which revealed him to be Odysseus. He made Penelope promise not to reveal who he was, and that he had a plan to get rid of the suitors, and now she was in on it. The next day, Penelope announces a contest to win her hand in marriage. Only the man who could string Odysseus' legendary bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads could marry her. This was clever, as Odysseus' bow was large and only he had the skill to wield it. All the suitors tried and failed miserably, and it's then that the beggar asked if he might have a chance. All the suitors laughed and jeered at him, but the beggar confidently picked up the bow and effortlessly shot an arrow that pierced all 12 axe heads. He then took another arrow and shot Antinous right in the throat. In the ensuing moments, all the suitors jumped up and started looking for their weapons and armor, but it was all gone, hidden the night before. Instead, what they found was Telemachus wearing full armor and holding a lance, and then Odysseus fires arrow after arrow and the suitors keep dropping. They chased the remaining suitors away and cornered a large group where the beggar announced that he was, in fact, Odysseus, rightful king of Ithaca. And even though the suitors apologized and told him they'd repay him for all the wine and food they took, he slaughtered them all. Finally, Odysseus and Penelope had a chance to talk openly, but she was still unsure. Could this be a trick? A god in disguise, perhaps? She was worried and didn't speak to Odysseus, who felt rejected, and said that if she wouldn't even speak to him, then at least she could set up a bed where he might sleep alone. Clever Penelope got an idea and told her servants to take her bed and move it for her. Upon hearing this, Odysseus said that that would be impossible, since he'd carved that bed from a mighty olive tree, which the bed and home had been constructed around. It couldn't be moved. This secret was only known by the two of them, and feeling confident that no god could possibly know this detail, she embraced her husband, and at long last, Odysseus' journey was over. Well, not quite. He first had to make amends with Poseidon, so he sacrificed a boar, a bull, and a ram to the mighty god, and lived a long life with his stalwart wife by his side. You made it this far. Like, share, and subscribe to Uncomfortable Game Shorts. I make lots of easy guides and reviews. I even made this video on the 12 labors of Heracles. Check that out here.